Hello viewers, welcome to Diagnostics. Dio here. Today we have a 2002 Chevy Silverado with a 4.3 liter. The customer complaint on this vehicle is the engine doesn't start. The vehicle was driving fine before when the owner drove it across this field, and then the engine just died. So he left it here. After that it became a crank no start condition. So we are here to figure out why this engine doesn't start. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna confirm the customer's complaint. After confirming the customer's complaint, we're gonna connect a scan tool to the vehicle to see if we have any trouble codes in memory that will give us direction to know which way we're gonna go, so we can figure out whatever that's causing this engine to not start. So now let's go inside the vehicle and confirm the customer's complaint. Okay, so I'm gonna try to start the engine. Let's see if it's gonna start. So as you can hear, the engine cranks, but it doesn't start. Let's try that one more time. So right there, we have confirmed the customer's complaint. It's definitely a crank no start condition. So now I'm gonna get a scan tool connected to the vehicle to see if we have any trouble codes in memory. So I'm gonna get the scan tool connected and then I'll bring you guys back up. So right there, the scan tool has identified the vehicle. So everything looks good. So this is an automatic, this one has an automatic transmission. So let's go to the engine. Let's see if we have any trouble codes in memory. So all powertrain codes. So right there, as you can see, we don't have any trouble codes in memory. So the scan tool is not going to be useful right now. So let's get the scan tool out of here. Let's crank this once again. So as you can see, the engine doesn't start and we don't have any trouble codes in memory. So what do you do when you don't have any trouble code in the engine computer and the engine doesn't start? So we're gonna look at the basics first, okay? Let's check the basics. For an engine to run, we need spark, compression, and fuel, okay? We need to have spark in the cylinder and fuel and air, compressed air, for the engine to run. So the first thing we're gonna do is we can check compression just by listening to how the engine sounds. So based on how the engine sounds, I don't think we have a mechanical problem with this engine. Let me crank it once again so you can hear. So as you can hear, the engine cranks fine. The cranking cadence sounds even. So I don't think we have a mechanical problem with this engine. So we're gonna put the compression out of the picture right now, okay? I don't think we're dealing with lack of compression. So I'm assuming based on how this engine sounds, we have good compression. I mean, this is not a 100% accurate test, but based on how it sounds, I'm pretty sure we don't have a compression issue. So now we're gonna check for spark or fuel. So we can go under the hood and find our service port in the fuel rail. We can open the fuel rail and crank it. I mean, we can open the shredder valve in the service port and crank it to see if fuel will come out of the fuel rail. Or we can just spray some starting fluid. We can give it a little bit of starting fluid to see if it's gonna start. If the engine starts after giving it starting fluid, we will know that we have a problem with the fuel delivery system, okay? Our problem is in the fuel system. If it starts after spraying some starting fluid in the air cleaner tube. So let's go under the hood and see if we can find a service port in the fuel system. But if there isn't any service port, we will just spray some starting fluid to see if the engine runs. If the engine doesn't run, then we will check the ignition system. So it's gonna be one of the three, okay? It's either compression or spark or fuel that causes the engine to not run. So let's go under the hood and check that. Alright, so we are here under the hood. I have my can of starting fluid over here. So this is just gonna help us diagnose this really fast. We're gonna look around the engine here. So we're gonna look around the intake to see if there's a service port. So these two lines that you see over here, these are fuel lines, okay? The big one is the fuel supply line, and then the other one is the, looks like a return line. So we don't have a service port on this engine, okay? So I'm gonna undo this. Let's do this really fast. A quick and dirty test you can do. I mean, it's not the safest, but it can show you if you have a fuel delivery problem. So I'm gonna spray this starting fluid in there. So we're gonna put this back. Okay. Now let's go inside the truck and crank it. If it starts, then our problem is in the fuel delivery system. All right, so let's see. So the battery is starting to get a little bit weak. So after spraying some starting fluid in the air cleaner tube, the engine still doesn't start. So it's still a crank no start condition after spraying starting fluid in the air cleaner tube. So we most likely don't have a fuel starvation problem, because if we did, it would have started for a couple seconds and then die. So since it didn't do that, now we're gonna shift our focus towards the ignition system. So let's go under the hood and check for spark. So I do have this little spark tester here. Let's make sure that there is power going to the spark plugs to cause the spark plugs to produce a spark. So let's go under the hood and check that. Alright, so we are here under the hood. I want to do this really quickly. So down here is my spark plug wire. Okay, so I'm gonna connect my spark tester to the spark plug wire, and then I will ground it on this stud over here on the exhaust manifold. Alright guys, so I got the spark tester connected to the spark plug wire. Let me zoom in so I can show you. So right there, our spark tester is connected to the spark plug wire. So now I'm gonna crank the engine to see if there will be any spark there. So let me see how I'm gonna do this. I'm here by myself, so I am alone. This is, I don't know if I can leave the camera here and crank it. So I don't want to leave the camera here while I'm gonna be inside the truck cranking it, because the camera might move and you may not see the spark tester. Okay, and I don't have my good tripod with me. So because we want to focus on the spark tester to see if there will be spark there while we're cranking the engine. So since I'm here by myself, I need to get a little bit creative. So I'm gonna go, let me go to my car and find my U-Activate tool. I can still crank it while I'm here under the hood, but I'm gonna have to use a tool to bypass the starter relay. Let me open this. Let's find where the starter relay is. So right over here. So here is the starter relay. So if we sit this way, so the starter relay will be this guy over here. And so this is it. So this is our starter relay. Okay, so let's remove it. So I'm gonna go get my U-Activate tool, then we're gonna bypass this relay so we can crank the engine while we're here under the hood. So I'll go get the tool and then I'll bring you guys back up. Alright, so here is our U-Activate tool. So I love this tool. This is one of my favorite tools. I don't really use it that much, but when you need it, you really need it. It's a very, very good tool. So we're gonna use this tool to bypass the relay. Okay, so this is gonna go over here, and then we're gonna turn the key on. The key has to be on, okay, because we're gonna bypass the starter relay to see if we will have any spark on that cylinder. So now let's go under the hood. All right, so we're gonna connect this right there. Now let me try to crank it. So that's good. Okay, so I can crank it while we're here under the hood. So I'm going to zoom into the spark tester. So let's see if we have any spark there while I'm cranking the engine. So as you can see, we don't have any spark at this spark tester. So I hope you guys can see this. So let's crank it one more time. All right, so our problem is in the ignition system because, okay, so there's no spark at the spark tester. So let me zoom out again. So this is a distributor type engine. So this engine has an ignition coil and let me put this over here. So this engine has an ignition coil and a distributor that distributes power to each spark plug. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to test the coil that supplies power to the distributor cap, and then the cap supplies power to the rotor inside the distributor, and as the rotor spins it sends power to each cylinder basically. So let's disconnect this because our coil is right behind this tube. So we're gonna remove this. It smells like fuel here, so I'm pretty sure the spark plugs are fouled. So here's our ignition coil, okay, and there is our distributor. I hope you can see that. So this is the distributor cap and these are the spark plug wires. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna test the ignition coil first. So I'm gonna disconnect the ignition coil high voltage wire. Okay, so I'm gonna grab a test light. I will connect a test light to ground. We're gonna put a test light here, and while we're cranking the engine we should see spark jumping out of this coil while the engine is cranking. So let me grab a test light and test this coil. All right, so here's my test light. I'm gonna connect it right over here on this AC compressor bolt. So that's good ground right there. So we're gonna test our test light. Let's touch the B positive terminal on the alternator. As you can see, our test light lights. So there's good ground on the other side of the test light. So we're gonna put this over here and see what kind of spark is gonna come out of this coil. So I'm gonna put this right there. So we're gonna crank this. So as you guys saw, there is spark coming out of that coil. I mean, it doesn't really seem like a strong spark. It kind of seems weak, but let's look at it once again. So there's definitely spark coming out of the coil. So this tells me that the coil is good, the wiring is good, there's control at the coil. So the computer is controlling this coil, so this is good. Okay, now knowing that we didn't have any spark at this spark plug wire, now what I'm going to do, knowing that we have spark here, because the coil sends spark, okay, it sends power, okay, high voltage through this wire, which goes to the distributor cap, and it goes on the center probe of the distributor cap, and as the rotor spins, that power gets distributed to each cylinder. So now what I'm going to do is I am going to disconnect one spark plug wire over here, just any wire. Actually, let's see if we can disconnect this one over here. So let's disconnect this guy. So with this one disconnected, now I'm going to put my test light over here on this distributor cap tower to see if there will be any spark jumping out of this tower. So since we have power coming out of this coil, and power flows through this wire, okay, and it goes in the distributor cap, and the distributor cap puts it on the rotor, and when the rotor spins, it sends power to each cylinder, okay. So right now I am going to put my test light over here. Let me see if I can get this light to shine on that tower. So I'm gonna put my test light right over here, okay, and I got this wire, the wire that goes to the cylinder, the spark plug wire that goes to the cylinder, disconnected. While we're cranking the engine, we should have spark jumping out of this tower, okay. If there's no spark jumping out of this tower, then our problem will either be a distributor cap or the rotor inside the distributor, or the wire, this wire over here, okay, the wire between the coil and the distributor cap, okay. So the key is still on inside the vehicle, so I'm gonna flip this switch to the on position so we can crank the engine. So we're cranking the engine, so I'm gonna put my test light right there. As you can see, there's no spark coming out of that tower. So as you guys saw, there's no spark coming out of this tower. So our problem is in this distributor, because there's power going to the distributor cap, but there's no power getting out of the distributor cap, okay. Now you might argue if this wire over here is good or not. So the wire getting out of the coil, so what I can do is I can disconnect it. Okay, so here's the wire. Okay, let me zoom you guys out a little bit. Here's the wire that's coming out of the coil. So because we could have an open wire between the coil and the distributor cap, and if this wire is open, we're not gonna have any power getting out of the distributor cap. So now let's check this. Okay, so if I put my test light over here while we're cranking it, if we see spark jumping out of here, it means the wire, the coil wire, is good. So now let's crank the engine. Right there. As you can see, we have spark right there. So as you guys saw, there's spark jumping out of this wire. So this wire is good, okay? I mean, it didn't really look like strong spark, but I mean, that was good enough. Okay, so the wire, the coil wire, so the coil wire between the coil and the distributor cap is good. So now I'm gonna reconnect the coil wire to the distributor cap. Okay, so that's good. So we know the wire between the coil and the distributor cap is good. So we still have this wires, this spark plug wire disconnected. So we're gonna do this test one more time to see if there will be any spark jumping out of this tower. Okay, so now let's crank the engine. So right there, as you can see, there's no spark jumping this tower. All right, so there's no spark coming out of here. So our problem is either this cap or the rotor inside the distributor. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna disconnect all these spark plug wires. Let me get this test light out of the way. So this is where our problem is, guys. We need to figure out why there's no power getting out of the distributor. Okay, so I'm gonna disconnect all these wires, and once you disconnect these wires, you gotta make sure you put them back where they came out of. So on this side, I don't know if you can see, it's dark out here, so one on the back is gonna go over here, so it looks like cylinder number 6, and this one is cylinder number 4, and this one, and they should have numbers on them. Okay, I'm just gonna leave those like that. Don't move them too much. That way we don't have to go back and review the firing order. Because if you don't put this back in order, the engine is not gonna start. All right, so I got all the wires disconnected. So now I'm gonna remove the distributor cap. So the distributor cap has 2 bolts that hold it down. There's one over here, and then there's another one back there. So I'm gonna remove these 2 bolts so we can remove the distributor cap. I will remove these 2 bolts and then I'll bring you guys back up. All right, so I undid the bolts that hold the distributor cap down. So now we're gonna remove the distributor cap. So here comes the distributor cap. And this distributor cap looks new. It looks like it's been recently replaced. So let's get this out of the way. So there's the rotor right there. Okay, I want to remove this rotor. It looks like the rotor has 2 bolts also that hold it down. I'm gonna remove this rotor. Okay, I will get these 2 bolts undone and then I'll bring you guys back up so we can remove the rotor. All right, so I undid the 2 bolts that hold the rotor down. So now we're gonna remove the rotor. And if you look closely here, you will see that, I see a little bit of corrosion right there. Let's take the cap. So the cap over here, I see some presence of kind of moisture in this cap. I don't know if you can tell. So basically what happens is this over here is the coil. So the coil wire comes over here. So it sends high voltage in the center terminal of the distributor cap. And then the rotor sits this way. So this prong sits on top of this. So it sends power on the rotor, and then the rotor spins inside the distributor. So as the rotor spins inside, it sends power to each terminal of the distributor cap, and each terminal is connected to the spark plug wire. Okay, so if the rotor lines up with that, it sends power to that one. If it lines up with this, it sends power to this. If it lines up to this one, it sends power to this one, which then sends power to the spark plug wire, and then the spark plug, and then there's spark inside the cylinder, then the engine starts. So since when I disconnected one of the spark plug wires on this side and I put my test light here, there was no spark getting out of this distributor cap tower. So that told me that the problem is either the cap itself, because you can have an open, because this tower over here is where the coil wire connects to. So if there's an open over here, so that power won't get to the rotor. Okay, so we could have a defective cap or a defective rotor itself. Okay, so we're gonna inspect the rest of the distributor. We're gonna wipe it down. I'm gonna replace the distributor cap and the rotor, and then we will try it once again and see if the vehicle will start after replacing the rotor and the distributor cap. I don't really see a big sign of damage on this cap besides the moisture on the side, you know, and these terminals over here are not really clean, so this here could be a problem, you know. And the rotor itself, I mean, nothing that I can really see and show you guys, but again, if our coil is sending power to this and there's no power getting out of these towers, then the problem is most likely this guy. I mean, I don't see what else that will cause this problem. Okay, so let's inspect the distributor itself. I don't know if you can see right in there. Let me show you. You see the distributor? Oh wow. So it looks like water or coolant. You see all that crusty stuff? It looks like coolant had been going inside this distributor. So I'm gonna wipe all this crusty stuff down, and then I'll bring you guys back up. Let's see if it's gonna help. But if not, we might have to replace the whole distributor. Yeah, because I mean, yeah, I think this is gonna need, yeah, because this is not supposed to be there, guys. It's supposed to be clean. Okay, so maybe there's a coolant leak somewhere here and coolant was leaking. Usually I see these heater hoses leak and you have coolant. I mean, these hoses that go into the hero core, they would start leaking and then you have coolant get inside the distributor. And I'm pretty sure that's what happened here. Okay, so I'll wipe this down. At this point I'm kind of just thinking whether I should just put a new distributor on this one. You know, new distributor, new rotor, new cap, new spark plug wires. I'm sure once we replace all of those, this truck will start. All right, so I'm gonna wipe this down first and then I'll bring you guys back up. All right guys, so I cleaned the top of the distributor. So right there, as you can see, it looks a lot better than it was. Okay, and inside the distributor we have the crank sensor in there. So since we have a spark getting out of the coil, so the crank sensor in that distributor is good. Okay, so as I was cleaning it, I kind of thought about how this system works once again. So I don't think there's any need to replace this distributor, because I mean the bearing of the distributor here, the shaft, there's no play on the distributor shaft, so that's good, you know. And if the crank sensor in the distributor was defective, we wouldn't have spark coming out of this coil. Okay, so basically there's no need to replace that distributor. I'm not gonna replace it. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna replace the rotor and the distributor cap. Okay, this is the rotor and the old distributor cap, so I'm gonna put them over here. Now I got a new rotor and a new distributor cap from Napa, so here's the part number for the distributor cap. So here is the new distributor cap. So we're gonna install this one. Okay, nice and shiny. So over here we have our rotor, and here's the part number for the rotor. Let's get the rotor out of the box. Okay, so we're gonna install this rotor and this new distributor cap. Okay, so installing this is really straightforward. I mean, I don't really have enough room to show you what I'm doing back there, so I'm gonna get these two items installed and then I'll bring you guys back up so we can try to start the engine and see if the engine will start after replacing the rotor and the distributor cap. But I'm sure once we install these two items, this engine will start. So I'm gonna get these two installed and then I'll bring you guys back up. Alright, so I got the new rotor installed in the distributor. So this rotor has two tiny bolts that I had to tighten. So I got those two bolts tightened. So now we're gonna install the distributor cap. Alright, so the cap is installed. So now I'm gonna tighten those two bolts. I will connect the spark plug wires and then I'll bring you guys back up so we can start the engine. Alright guys, so I have installed the new rotor and the new distributor cap. So right there, as you can see, everything is installed. I also reinstalled the spark plug wires. So everything is connected. I left one spark plug wire disconnected. So now we're gonna use our test light to see if there will be any spark jumping out of this distributor cap tower. Okay, so I already got the key turned on inside the truck. So we're gonna use this U-activate tool to crank the engine. So now let's crank the engine and see what happens. So right there, as you can see, the engine just started. Okay, so I was gonna go inside the vehicle and turn off the engine because I had this air cleaner tube disconnected. So this is fixed, guys. This is fixed. I was gonna rush inside the vehicle and and turn off the engine so I can put everything back together so we can start it once again. So now what I want to do, as you guys saw, it's already started, so this is good. Let me get my test light out of here. Okay, I'm gonna reconnect our starter relay, and there's no need to check spark over here because, as you guys heard, it's started. Oh, guess what? You see there's a leak over here. You see how this thing is getting, this wire loom is getting wet? So these two heater hoses are leaking. So this is what caused this problem. I'm gonna have to fix that. All right, so now I'm gonna install the air cleaner tube and then I'm gonna reinstall our starter relay. Then I'll bring you guys back up so we can start the engine. All right guys, so I got everything reconnected. So now let's go inside the vehicle and start the engine. So right there, as you can hear, the engine is now running. So this is fixed. Okay? So the problem was a defective rotor and a cap. So this rotor and the cap is bad. Okay? As you can hear, the engine is running. So there's something I'm noticing. Watch there. There's a leak over here. You see that? There's a leak right there. You see that leak? So this leak is what caused that rotor and the cap to go bad. There's a leak right there. Let me zoom you guys in so you can see. Do you see that leak? So there's a coolant leak right there. So this is fixed, okay? We're gonna take this truck to the shop so we can fix that coolant leak, and this truck will be good to go. Okay. Alright, so the crank no start condition has been fixed. So now let's go inside the vehicle and turn off the truck so we can wrap up this video. So let's turn this off. As you can see, there's no check engine light on the dash, so that's good. Alright, so I'm gonna turn off the engine. So let's go under the hood so we can wrap up this video. Alright guys, so we are back here under the hood. You guys heard the engine run, so this vehicle is fixed. So the crank no start condition has been fixed. The problem was a defective rotor and cap, okay? I don't know if the camera was able to pick up coolant leaking out of these two heater hoses. So there's a leak over here. We're gonna have to fix this leak afterwards. So coolant leaking out of there falls right on top of the distributor, and that's what caused this problem to occur, okay? So I'm gonna leave this right over here. This is how you fix an engine that cranks and doesn't start. When you have an engine that cranks and doesn't start, you have to check for spark, fuel, and compression. So based on how this engine sounded, I didn't want to check compression because it sounded consistent and even. So that told me that we didn't have a mechanical problem. And then the next thing you can check is fuel. We looked at the fuel lines. We don't have a service port on this one. We used starting fluid to spray in the air cleaner tube. We sprayed starting fluid. The engine still didn't start. So that told me that our problem was not fuel related. And then since we already checked fuel, we ruled out fuel and we ruled out a mechanical problem, we had one thing left, which is ignition. We had to make sure that there is power going to the spark plug so that the spark plug can produce the spark. We used a spark tester and we saw that there was no spark on the spark tester. So that's why we focused on the ignition system. We checked the ignition coil. The coil was putting out power. But then when we disconnected one of the spark plug wires at the distributor cap, there was no power getting out of the distributor cap. So that told me that the problem was either between the coil and the distributor cap, or the cap itself, or the rotor. We checked the wire that sends power to the distributor cap. The wire was good. We removed the distributor cap and the rotor. We inspected it. I didn't really see any defect rather than the moisture I saw inside the cap. So we replaced the distributor cap and the rotor. Now the engine is running. So this is fixed, guys. I'm gonna leave this right over here. This is how you fix an engine that cranks and doesn't start. These are the main things you check, and pretty much 100% of the time or 99% of the time your problem will be in one of these systems. It's either going to be the fuel system or the ignition system or a mechanical problem. So I hope you like this video. If you do like the video, give it a thumbs up. If you don't, give it a thumb down. But if you do, you gotta tell me why so we can make better videos in the future. If this is your first time here, subscribe to the channel. Ring the bell so you can get notified every time I upload a new video. If you have any comments, questions, criticism, leave them in the comment box. Thanks for watching, guys. See you next time. Alright guys, I forgot to mention one thing. I am going to recommend replacing the spark plug wires and the spark plug on this truck. Although it runs good and it sounds good, but I'm gonna recommend replacing the wires and the plugs just to be safe, because if we have an open wire or a defective wire, that can cause the rotor and the distributor cap to go bad. So just to be safe, I'm gonna recommend plugs and wires on this truck, okay? Although it runs fine and everything sounds good, but I'm going to recommend plugs and wires on this one, okay? So I wanted to mention that. I hope you liked the video. See you next time.